It was a quiet night on Earth, just like any other. The sky was dotted with stars, and the world slept beneath a blanket of calm. But deep beneath the surface of the planet, something stirred. A force, dormant for centuries, was awakening. In a remote corner of the Earth, near the Arctic Circle, a team of scientists were working on an ambitious project. Sarah Mitchell, a young geophysicist, led the team. She had always been passionate about studying the mysteries of the Earth's core, but nothing could prepare her for what she was about to discover. One fateful evening, Sarah and her team were analyzing seismic activity beneath the ice. The data was strange. Irregular waves pulsed from the planet's core, as if something was waking up. It wasn't just a tremor or a shift in tectonic plates. It was a rhythmic, almost deliberate signal. The readings grew stronger with every passing minute. "What in the world is this?" Sarah whispered to herself, staring at the glowing screen of her monitor. The readings didn't match anything she had seen before. It was as if the Earth itself was sending a message. She quickly called her team to come and look. As the rest of the team gathered around, Sarah's heart raced. The data was growing more and more unusual. It seemed to be getting louder, more intense. There was a moment when it felt as though the ground beneath them was vibrating, just slightly. But then, a sudden silence followed. The lights in their small research facility flickered, then went out. The room plunged into darkness. "Is everyone okay?" Sarah asked, her voice tense. "We're fine, but something's wrong," replied Mark, the senior technician. He flipped a switch to turn the backup power on. The lights returned, but the screens on their monitors were static, showing nothing but a faint pulsing light. "What do you think is happening?" asked Emily, a member of the team. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, "but whatever it is, it's not natural." The data was gone, replaced by an eerie calm. Sarah rubbed her eyes, trying to make sense of it all. The strange waves had stopped, but the atmosphere in the room felt different, almost heavy, as if something was waiting just beyond the horizon, something that had been sleeping for far too long. Suddenly, without warning, a piercing sound filled the room. A low hum, vibrating through the very walls of the facility. The team members winced, covering their ears. The sound grew louder, the vibrations stronger, as if the Earth itself was awakening. "It's coming from below," Mark said, his voice shaking. "Something deep beneath the ground." "What's going on?" Emily asked in a panic. This is impossible." Sarah stared at the sensors. The readings were going wild. The waves had returned, stronger than ever. But this time, they weren't just seismic. They were something else. Something far more complex, far more dangerous. "Stay calm," Sarah shouted, trying to get her team's attention. "We need to analyze this data. We need to figure out what's going on before it gets worse." But as she said those words, the hum reached a deafening pitch. The walls began to shake, and the lights flickered once again. This time, they didn't return. The ground trembled beneath their feet. And then, everything stopped. An eerie silence fell over the room. The shaking had ceased, the hum had vanished, and the monitors were blank once again. It felt as if the world had paused. The tension in the air was suffocating. "What just happened?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know, but I think we've just discovered something that we weren't supposed to find," Sarah whispered. Her eyes were wide with fear, her heart pounding in her chest. Outside, in the cold, still night, the stars twinkled above, seemingly unaware of the catastrophe brewing beneath their feet. But that would change soon. The quiet hum that had been felt beneath the Earth had now spread across the planet, reaching the farthest corners of the world. Unseen to the people of Earth, a force began to stir, ancient, powerful, and ready to reveal itself. Something from the deepest layers of the Earth was coming back to life. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. But she didn't know just how right she was. What they had uncovered was more than a mere anomaly. It was a sign. The first sign of something much larger, something that had been sleeping for thousands of years. And now, it was waking up. The universe had begun to take notice, and Sarah, along with her team, had just uncovered the key to unlocking a force beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. This was the beginning of the end, or perhaps the beginning of a new chapter in humanity's story. But one thing was certain: Earth would never be the same again. The next morning, Sarah and her team were still reeling from the events of the night before. The facility was quiet now, almost too quiet. The strange hum had faded away, but something felt off. The world outside seemed oblivious to the chaos that had just taken place beneath their feet. Yet, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that was now beyond their control. "We need to report this to someone," Mark suggested, rubbing his eyes in exhaustion. "We can't keep this to ourselves." "I agree," Sarah said, pacing back and forth. "But who would believe us? We don't even know what happened. The data's gone. The sensors are shot. Everything is messed up." She stopped pacing and looked at the others. "But I know what I felt. I know what we heard. That sound, those vibrations. It wasn't just a freak earthquake. This was something else." The team members looked at each other nervously. No one dared to speak the truth aloud. What if they had awakened something that was never meant to be discovered? What if the Earth was hiding more than they had ever imagined? The thought made Sarah's skin crawl, but she pushed it aside. There were more immediate concerns to deal with. The government, the military, they needed to be informed. She grabbed the phone and dialed the emergency number for the Department of Defense. The call rang several times before being answered by a calm voice on the other end. "Hello, this is Captain Davis. How can I help you?" "This is Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the Arctic Seismology Lab," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We've encountered something strange beneath the Earth's surface. I need to report it immediately." "Are you in immediate danger?" Captain Davis asked, his voice suddenly more alert. No immediate danger," Sarah replied quickly. "But we've picked up unusual seismic activity. It's not like anything we've ever seen. It's growing stronger by the hour, and I think it's coming from below the ice." "Do you have any evidence of this?" Captain Davis asked. "We do," Sarah said, though it was difficult to explain the situation without sounding insane. "But the data it's corrupted. The monitors stopped working. All we have are the vibrations and the strange hum. But it's real. We felt it. It's not just an anomaly." There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Captain Davis spoke again, his voice low and careful. "Stay where you are. I'll have someone on the way to your location immediately. In the meantime, do not make any further attempts to investigate. Do you understand?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "I understand," she said, though a small part of her wanted to press the issue, to demand answers. She knew, deep down, that whatever they had uncovered was far more significant than they realized. And now, the government was getting involved. She hung up the phone and turned to her team, who were anxiously waiting for her to speak. "They're sending someone," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "But we need to stay alert. Whatever's happening, it's not over. If anything, it's just begun." The tension in the room thickened, as if something, or someone, was watching them. The silence outside the facility had become deafening, the air still and unnervingly quiet. Sarah could almost feel it, the presence of something ancient stirring beneath the earth. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized how unprepared they were for what was coming. But she wasn't going to back down. This was too important. Too much was at stake. She had to find out what was really going on, even if it meant uncovering something far beyond her understanding. Just then, a loud knock echoed through the door, breaking the tension. Sarah jumped, startled by the sound. She quickly walked over to the door and opened it to reveal a man in a military uniform standing in the doorway. "Dr. Mitchell," the man asked, his voice firm. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Harris. I'm here to assess the situation. Sarah nodded, stepping aside to let him in. Thank you for coming so quickly. I'm not here for a chat, Doctor, Harris interrupted, his expression stern. We have a lot to discuss, but first, I need to know exactly what you felt and experienced last night. Sarah exchanged a quick glance with her team before stepping aside to let him into the facility. The next few hours would determine everything. The world was about to change, and Sarah could feel the weight of the moment. As Harris entered the control room, Sarah couldn't help but feel a chill crawl up her spine. The government's involvement meant that things were about to get far more complicated, and whatever had been awakened beneath the ice, whatever power had been hidden for so long, was now something the whole world would soon have to face. The cold, sterile walls of the facility felt even more suffocating now that Colonel Harris had arrived. His presence, confident and commanding, seemed to fill every corner of the room, making Sarah feel as though she was being watched under a microscope. The whole team stood around, silently waiting for what would come next. No one dared to break the heavy silence, each of them anxiously wondering what the colonel had in store for them. Harris stood in front of the holographic projection display, carefully analyzing the readouts. His fingers traced the lines of data, his brow furrowing deeper with every passing second. The numbers, which had seemed incomprehensible to Sarah and her team, suddenly took on a new urgency in his hands. He was looking for something specific, something that, until now, had been hidden from the human eye. This is unlike anything I've ever seen, Harris muttered under his breath, his eyes never leaving the projections. His voice was steady, but there was an edge of unease in it that Sarah couldn't ignore. These aren't just natural occurrences. These patterns, they're deliberate. The word deliberate hung in the air, leaving a cold shiver down Sarah's spine. Deliberate? What do you mean? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. Harris turned to her, his expression unreadable. This seismic activity isn't random. Whoever, or whatever, was responsible for causing these tremors has been preparing for a long time. What do you mean by preparing? Mark interjected, stepping forward. Preparing for what? Harris didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked over to the control panel and activated a secondary screen. The screen flickered to life, displaying a map of the Earth, overlaid with strange symbols, seemingly of no known origin. It was like nothing Sarah had ever seen before. These symbols were carved into the land itself, stretching across continents, hidden for centuries. These, Harris said, pointing at the symbols on the screen, are not just earthquakes or tectonic movements. These are markers, ancient markers, placed deliberately by an unknown force. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Are you saying these symbols are man-made? Not man-made, Harris replied, but not natural either. These patterns are far older than any civilization on Earth. They're older than any of the known records we have. And I suspect they've been dormant for millennia. The words dormant for millennia echoed through Sarah's mind, filling her with both dread and awe. What were they dealing with? What had they awakened? Why did we feel it now? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did it happen only recently? Harris turned his gaze back to the screen, his face darkening as he considered her question. That, Dr. Mitchell, is the million-dollar question. Something triggered these markers, something that activated whatever lies beneath. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Whatever lay beneath, what had been hidden under the earth for all this time. Was it an ancient force, a weapon? Or worse, was it something alive? We need to find out what's down there, Mark said, breaking the tense silence. We need to know exactly what we've awakened. I agree, Harris said, his voice lowering, almost to a whisper, but I'm afraid it's not that simple. Sarah furrowed her brow, sensing the weight of his words. What do you mean? Harris didn't look at her. Instead, he typed something into the control panel. A new image appeared on the screen. It was a highly detailed map of the area where the tremors had originated, But this map was not like any regular topographic map. It had layers, each layer representing a different depth beneath the Earth's crust. There was one spot in particular that caught Sarah's attention, a red flashing dot, pulsing rhythmically. It was located deep under the ice, in a place so remote it was beyond their usual reach. "This is the point of origin," Harris said, his voice cold. "We believe this is where the power has been lying dormant, but something else is happening now. The closer we get, the more active the markers become. And that's not all." "What else?" Sarah asked, already fearing the answer. Harris looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "It's not just a dormant power. It's a signal." "A signal," Sarah repeated. "A signal from who?" "From them," Harris said, finally locking eyes with her. "From whoever built these markers in the first place. Whoever placed them here, so long ago, is now trying to contact us. And I don't think they're interested in a peaceful conversation." The words hit like a thunderclap. Sarah felt a cold sweat run down her back. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information that were slowly coming into focus. The tremors, the strange hum, the symbols, they were all connected to this signal. But who were these beings, and what did they want with humanity? Suddenly, the entire room shook violently. The floor trembled beneath their feet, as if the earth itself was waking up. Sarah and the team scrambled to stay balanced, but Harris remained unnervingly calm, his hand steady as he gripped the edge of the control panel. "Get ready," Harris said, his voice now filled with urgency. "This is just the beginning." The lights flickered, and a low, ominous hum filled the air again. The same hum they had heard the night before. It was louder now, vibrating through their bones. But this time, it felt different, more urgent, more alive. "We've only just scratched the surface," Harris said grimly, as the lights flickered again, "and I fear what lies below will change everything." The tremors subsided, but the sense of foreboding lingered in the air like a heavy fog. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the glowing map on the screen, where the red flashing dot continued to pulse in a rhythmic, almost hypnotic pattern. The deep hum still vibrated in the room, felt deep in their chests, but now it was mixed with something more unsettling, a distinct echo that almost sounded like a whisper, as if the earth itself were trying to communicate. Mark, who had been silent for several moments, was the first to speak. "Do you think whatever's down there is aware of us? That it knows we're getting closer?" Harris didn't immediately answer. Instead, he stepped toward the map, his gaze fixed on the glowing point of origin. "It's not just aware of us," he said slowly. "I think it's waiting for us." The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. The idea of an ancient power buried under the Earth's surface, waiting and watching, was more terrifying than anything she had ever considered. What kind of intelligence could be so patient, so deliberate in its movements? "We need to get to that location," Harris continued, as he turned back to the team. "We need to go to the source and investigate. We can't afford to wait any longer. Who knows what kind of power we're dealing with, and we certainly don't want it to find us first." Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous it seemed. But she knew Harris was right. Staying here and doing nothing wasn't an option. The question was, what exactly were they going to find when they got there? "What's the plan?" Mark asked, crossing his arms. "We're mobilizing a team," Harris said, a steely resolve in his voice. "We'll need to transport everything, equipment, supplies, and personnel, to the site. This is going to be a long operation, and we need to be prepared for whatever we might encounter." The team immediately began preparing, gathering their gear and discussing the logistics of the operation. It was a race against time, and none of them could afford to waste a moment. As Sarah organized the necessary resources, her mind kept returning to one single unshakable thought. What if this wasn't a random event? What if humanity had just stumbled upon something far beyond their understanding, something that could either save them or doom them? The journey to the location took days, each moment feeling like an eternity. The team was on edge, constantly scanning the terrain, listening for any signs of movement. But there was nothing, just the vast emptiness of the icy landscape and the growing tension that hung in the air. Despite the preparations, there was no real sense of safety. Every step forward felt like they were inching closer to something that could erase them in an instant. As they neared the coordinates, the landscape grew even more desolate, as if nature itself had been altered by the presence of whatever was buried beneath. The wind howled like a restless spirit, biting into their skin. But it wasn't the cold that made Sarah's skin crawl. It was the sense that something was watching them, something ancient and powerful. Finally, they reached a small ridge overlooking a wide, open expanse. The ground here was cracked, fissured in unnatural ways. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline in her veins as she stared down at the massive, deep crevice stretching across the ground. This was it, the place where the tremors had originated. The red dot on the map was directly beneath them. "This is it," Harris said, his voice grave. "Whatever's down there is the source of everything." They set up camp near the edge of the crevice, readying their excavation equipment. As they worked, the air grew heavier, thick with tension. Sarah could almost feel the ground shifting beneath her feet, as though the earth itself was waking up. She couldn't explain it, but the feeling of being watched intensified with every passing minute. Without warning, a massive tremor rattled the ground. This one was stronger than the others, knocking Sarah off her feet. The entire team scrambled to maintain their balance, the earth shaking violently beneath them. Dust and debris exploded from the crevice, and the air was filled with a loud, deafening roar. Then the noise stopped, suddenly, as though the world had held its breath. For a moment, there was silence. But then something extraordinary happened. From deep within the crevice, a blinding light began to pulse, lighting up the surrounding area like a beacon. It was unlike any natural light Sarah had ever seen. Brilliant, shifting, almost alive. It surged upwards, expanding in a swirling vortex of color and energy. The intensity of the light grew, vibrating the ground beneath their feet, until it was almost unbearable. And then, without warning, it shot into the sky. The beam of light shot upward, piercing the sky, leaving a trail of energy in its wake. It wasn't like anything they had ever seen before. The light was sharp, intense, and seemed to tear through the very fabric of the atmosphere. Sarah shielded her eyes from the brilliance of it, her heart racing in her chest. "Get down," Harris shouted, as he dove to the ground, pulling Sarah and the others with him. "We don't know what that is." But it was too late. The light reached its apex, and in an instant, the sky seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. The entire area around them seemed to warp and distort. The power of the energy surged outward, causing the very air around them to crackle with an overwhelming force. Sarah could feel the energy pulling at her, stretching her molecules, bending her senses. Everything seemed to slow down, like she was caught in a dream. And for a brief moment, she thought they might all be lost. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the light disappeared. The ground stopped shaking. The air grew still again. And then there was a silence so profound that it felt unnatural. The team slowly rose to their feet, shaking from the experience. They stood there, staring at the sky, still processing what they had just witnessed. The light had vanished, but the effects lingered. "We've just seen the first glimpse of what's down there," Harris said, his voice strained. "And I don't think we're ready for what's coming next." The eerie calm that followed the eruption of light left the team with a sense of unease that only seemed to deepen with each passing second. The ground had stopped shaking, and the faint tremors that had plagued them earlier were gone, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. They gathered their equipment and started moving toward the edge of the crevice, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The blinding light had disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind only a strange, lingering hum in the air, like the faint buzzing of an insect trapped in a glass jar. It was the only sound that filled the stillness. What in the world was that? Mark's voice cut through the silence. He was staring at the empty sky above, his face pale, his hand. The air was thick with tension, the hum of the ancient being reverberating through the very bones of the team. Sarah's heart raced as the monstrous entity loomed before them, its eyes glowing with an eerie, malevolent light. The ground seemed to shift with every movement it made, as though the earth itself was bending to its will. The team had no choice but to stand their ground. It was clear they could not escape. Whatever this being was, it was far beyond their understanding, and it had made its presence known in the most destructive of ways. Mark's breath came in ragged gasps, his voice trembling. What do we do now? We're completely outmatched. Harris, however, stood his ground, his face hardened with determination. We fight. We have no choice. Sarah turned toward him, her mind racing. Fight. How do we fight something like that? It's beyond anything we've ever seen. I don't know, Harris admitted, his voice grim. But whatever it is, we can't let it destroy us. Not after everything we've uncovered. We have to stop it before it unleashes whatever it was meant to. Mark shook his head, disbelief written on his face. We're standing in front of an ancient god, Harris. We don't even know what it's capable of. Right now, we're just guessing, Harris said, his eyes narrowing as he watched the creature slowly advance. But we got to try. Sarah's gaze shifted back to the towering being. Its form continued to shift and warp, dark tendrils of energy swirling around it like a storm. The creature's very presence seemed to defy the laws of nature. There was no sound, only that deafening hum. The universe itself felt like it was being drawn toward the being, as though it was the center of everything, the epicenter of a force too strong to comprehend. And yet, despite the overwhelming power it exuded, Sarah could feel something. A weakness, a gap, something that didn't belong. She whispered, her voice barely audible. There's a crack in it, a flaw. What do you mean? Harris asked, turning toward her. The creature, she said, her eyes narrowing as she studied it closely. It's not whole. It's like something's missing. It's unstable. Harris's expression hardened. We have to exploit that. But how? Before Sarah could answer, the ground trembled once more. The ancient being raised one of its colossal arms, and as it did, a shockwave rippled outward, sending a blast of energy through the air. The force of the blast sent Sarah crashing to the ground, her body slamming against the rocky surface. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. Through the haze of pain, Sarah heard Harris's voice calling to her. Get up. We can't stop now. She struggled to her feet, still dizzy from the impact, but managed to steady herself. Her mind was racing, and a strange sense of clarity washed over her. There was something she had missed, something the team had overlooked. The ancient being's power was immense, but it was still bound to the earth. Its movements were erratic, almost chaotic at times, as though it was struggling to maintain control. The energy it radiated was wild, untamed. That was the crack in its armor. We need to get closer, Sarah said, her voice firmer now. There's something in the center of the being, something that's holding it together. If we can find that weak point, we can stop it. Harris's eyes widened with realization. You're right, but we can't do this alone. We need a plan. Mark looked at them, still shaking, but there was a spark of determination in his eyes. We'll do whatever it takes. The team quickly regrouped and formulated a plan. The massive creature was powerful, but it wasn't invincible. They needed to use its own energy against it. They could sense that its power was flowing from the center, where the cracks were most apparent. If they could reach it, they might just have a chance to destroy it. But as they approached, the creature's massive form shifted once more, as if sensing their movements. Its eyes locked onto them, and with a deep guttural growl, it unleashed a torrent of energy in their direction. The shockwave was unlike anything they had ever felt before. It knocked them off their feet, sending them sprawling across the uneven ground. Sarah gasped for air, the force of the blast nearly crushing her lungs. But as she fought to regain her composure, something inside her clicked. In that moment of chaos, she saw it, a faint pulse of light at the heart of the creature, a pulse that seemed to flicker with each movement, each attack. The weakness was there. The flaw was undeniable. "We have to go now," Sarah yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. The team scrambled to their feet, determined to reach the heart of the creature. The energy around them was becoming more intense, more volatile. They had to act fast. As they closed in on the pulsating core of the being, they could feel the air crackle with raw power. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Then, in the midst of the rising storm of energy, Sarah reached out with both hands and grasped the core of the creature. A surge of raw, unfiltered power coursed through her, sending shockwaves through her body. But she didn't let go. She could feel the creature's essence, its power, pulsing through her fingertips. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. The core of the creature pulsed violently in Sarah's hands, its power nearly overwhelming her senses. For a moment, everything seemed to blur, time slowed, and the sounds of the chaos around her faded into a dull hum. The very fabric of the universe seemed to stretch and strain under the weight of the creature's force. But Sarah didn't let go. She couldn't. Her team's survival depended on it. "Sarah," Harris shouted, his voice barely audible over the storm of energy swirling around them. "What's happening?" Sarah could feel the raw power coursing through her, its energy cracking against her mind like 1,000 thunderclaps. She struggled to maintain her focus, to control the flow of energy. There was no turning back now. She had to destroy the creature at its core. The pulse of light was almost too bright to look at, but Sarah focused on it, narrowing her thoughts. She could sense the cracks within the core now, weaknesses, fractures, places where the creature's essence was fraying. If she could just break through. "Hold on," she cried, her voice trained. "I can feel it. Just a little longer." Her fingers burned with the effort, but she was unwavering. The energy around her started to crackle and twist as the creature's form trembled. It was as if the being was fighting against its own destruction, trying to regain control. The world seemed to shake, the ground splitting open beneath their feet as the air itself turned into a vortex of unimaginable power. The team's eyes widened as they realized what Sarah was doing. "Are you sure about this?" Mark yelled, his face a mixture of fear and awe. "You're tampering with something we don't understand." "I have no choice," Sarah cried out, her grip tightening on the core. "This is the only way. It's too powerful for us to fight directly. We have to break it from the inside." The ground beneath their feet rumbled like a distant earthquake, the atmosphere charged with energy so potent it felt like it could tear apart the very fabric of reality. The energy around Sarah intensified, but she held steady, the core pulsing stronger and stronger as the cracks within it grew wider. The creature's massive form convulsed, its ancient eyes flashing with an intensity that almost seemed to pierce through space and time. It let out a sound, low, guttural, and filled with fury. The sound was so loud that it reverberated in Sarah's bones, shaking her to the core. But even as the creature lashed out in its final moments of existence, Sarah pressed on. With one final, desperate push, Sarah willed the energy in the core to fracture completely. There was a sudden flash of light, brilliant, blinding. It felt like the universe itself was collapsing in on itself, the energy twisting and warping into an impossible spiral. Sarah's body screamed in protest as the energy surged through her, but she couldn't let go. She couldn't stop now. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The light vanished, leaving only an eerie silence in its wake. Sarah collapsed to her knees, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her hands were still tingling with the last remnants of the ancient power she had wielded, but the creature's presence, Its immense, suffocating power was gone. The ground had stopped shaking, and the storm of energy had died down. For the first time in what felt like hours, there was nothing but stillness. The team, still standing in the aftermath of the cataclysmic event, stared in disbelief. The creature, the war god that had once threatened to tear apart the universe, was gone. Its power had been crushed, obliterated by Sarah's determination. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with the weight of what had just happened, the magnitude of the victory, and the cost of it. Finally, Harris broke the silence, his voice barely a whisper. "You did it. You saved us all." Sarah's chest rose and fell with each ragged breath, but she could barely muster the energy to speak. She nodded weakly, still processing what had just transpired. Her body felt like it was made of lead, her limbs heavy, but there was a deep sense of relief in her heart. They had won. They had stopped the unimaginable. Mark slowly approached her, his expression one of deep respect and awe. How did you know how to do that?" Sarah shook her head, her eyes filled with exhaustion and quiet disbelief. "I didn't. I just knew I had to do whatever it took. We didn't have any other choice." The team stood in a quiet circle, their gazes fixed on the empty space where the ancient being had once stood. It was hard to believe that something so monstrous had been defeated by something as simple as their will to survive. "You've saved us," Harris said again, this time more firmly. "You've saved the entire galaxy." Sarah managed a weak smile, her body still trembling. "I couldn't have done it without all of you." The victory wasn't just hers, it was theirs. The bonds forged in battle, the unwavering resolve to protect humanity and the galaxy, had seen them through to the end. And though the threat had been vanquished, the journey had changed them all. But for now, in the quiet aftermath, all that mattered was that they had won. They had faced the unimaginable and emerged victorious. The universe would never be the same again.